what we need to see in Medieval 3 Total War. So Medieval 3 is of course probably one of the most requested Total War games at the moment, and it's clear to see why. Total War 3 Kingdoms was a big hit for the Creative Assembly, but not so much in the West. Total War Saga Troy is a good game that has a following and has done reasonably well for what it is, but it is still held back by being a saga title rather than a full grand campaign experience. Warhammer is, well, whatever it is. And of course, Rome has already seen a sequel in Rome 2 that got DLC as recently as 2019 with the Rise of the Republic DLC, and had a remaster earlier this year, so we've been a bit over-Romed. That's why people want to see Medieval 3. But what do we need to see in Medieval 3 in order for it to be a resounding success that pleases both the hardcore Total War community as well as the masses? In this video, I'm going to go over what I think Medieval 3 absolutely needs in order to be a success, including aspects of the previous two Medieval titles, and what Medieval 3 needs to add in order to feel like a significant step up from the first two titles. Let's get into it. First, let's go over what I think Medieval 3 needs from Medieval 1. Now, one of the biggest letdowns for me as a longtime historical fan was seeing how much Medieval 2 cut out from Medieval 1 in terms of realism, factions, campaign mechanics, AI, and content. The most glaring omission that was cut from Medieval 2 was Medieval 1's era campaign system. Now, this was one of Medieval 1's greatest features, the fact that there were three distinct start dates for the campaign: early, high, and late. The early era is the standard start date of post-Manzikert 1080. The high era begins with the post-Fourth Crusade start date of 1212, and the late era begins post-Paleologan Restoration and post-Mongol invasion in the 14th century. Now, of course, the campaign map was updated to reflect these new start dates, and this is one of the reasons why Medieval 1 is one of my favorite Total War games of all time, aside from the plethora of other reasons that I detail in my retrospective review of that game, which you can see in the top right corner. In any case, Medieval 3 should definitely bring back these era campaigns. They are super fun and add a ton of replayability to the game in general. Who's up for a late era Byzantine campaign on Legendary? Another aspect of Medieval 1 that was cut out from Medieval 2 are the unique campaign mechanics that again add to the challenge and replayability of the game. The most important mechanic for me has to be the rebellion system, where factions could return from the grave after being destroyed if the conquering faction has been unable to pacify the local province effectively and is suffering from instability. Now, in newer Total War games, post-Medieval 2, these aspects have made a return, so rebels in Shogun 2 or Rome 2 can resurrect formerly destroyed clans or kingdoms. So I really hope Medieval 3 takes these systems and adds to them, makes them a little more dynamic and perhaps a little less predictable. Perhaps some sort of overall realm stability mechanic can be added as well that could work like an expanded Rome 2 politics system with not necessarily political parties, but with several dynasties and lords and barons that you have to pacify in order to keep your realm stable, sort of like a Crusader Kings 3 Lite. Another aspect that I hope Medieval 3 takes from Medieval 1 is the gritty atmosphere it had. Medieval 2 really altered the atmosphere in ways that I wasn't a fan of, from the gritty and sad 2D art and portraits to semi-goofy CGI-style portraits that continued into Empire style before they finally got rid of them in Napoleon and Shogun 2, when they introduced more atmospheric and stylized 2D art. Don't get me started on the 3D head models in Rome 2 and Attila. I strongly dislike them. One other thing to mention in this category are the regions and provinces in the campaign map. The Medieval 1 campaign map was, in no uncertain terms, far superior to the campaign map in terms of the way its provinces and cities were divided. Medieval 1 was far more immersive and atmospheric in that regard, since it included historical province names instead of simply naming the provinces Constantinople region or Palermo region. While those things were easily editable in Medieval 2 given its degree of modability, it was still extremely annoying that this was the way the default vanilla game was designed, and it really made it almost impossible for me to enjoy vanilla Medieval 2. Have I mentioned that I'm not the biggest fan of vanilla Medieval 2? Now let's talk about aspects of Medieval 2 that need to be included in Medieval 3. Medieval 2 is of course essentially an enhanced version of the Rome 1 engine, with some medieval appropriate mechanics added in, like the Catholic faction-only papal system where you try to get your bishops to the top and cater to papal favor, the again Catholic factions-only crusade system, the Islamic faction's jihad system, etc. Now honestly, a lot of these mechanics were a bit crude and were obviously a bit shoehorned into Rome's engine to work as best as they could. So Medieval 3 not only has to include all these mechanics, but it must enhance them and make them far more in-depth in order to really feel like it is making improvements here. Let's talk a bit more about the Crusades mechanic and the Orthodox factions as well. The Orthodox factions are really not portrayed well in Medieval 2, and don't really have any unique mechanics to speak of, which is extremely unfortunate. Of course, one of the catalysts for the First Crusade was the request of the Byzantine Emperor Alexios Komnenos for aid against invading Muslim Turks. This was not the only time Orthodox factions requested aid. After that, the Kingdom of Armenia, for example, often requested Crusader assistance, especially during the twilight of the Crusading era, and they did oftentimes cooperate not only for the purpose of conquering or retaking land from invaders, but also for defending cities and provinces under siege. This cooperation continued very late into the Crusades, even into the 1360s and 1370s. Of course, as the Byzantine Empire began to collapse in the face of internal strife and Ottoman attacks, they requested aid as well, again. I definitely think that Orthodox factions absolutely need to have some sort of crusade-related mechanic in order to make their campaigns a little more dynamic and replayable. Some way to request a crusade by giving an important reason. Some way to curry papal favor in order to have a crusade called to assist you. Perhaps even a way to try to unite the Orthodox, or Armenian Apostolic, and Catholic churches in order to secure more military and economic assistance than you otherwise would have received. Mechanics like these would really make the Eastern and Oriental Orthodox factions have more interesting campaigns. Religion in Medieval 2 worked pretty much the same way as religion in Rome 1, except with the addition of priests and imam agents. Of course, the Catholic factions received the most attention and the most unique mechanics, but these were not enough to make the experience immersive and important enough, in my opinion. Medieval 3 needs to have a more robust and diverse religion system, especially to make Northern Europe and the Middle East more interesting. Chivalry Total War for Rome Total War and Chivalry 2 for Medieval 2, working within the rather strict limitations of their respective games, add indestructible buildings in particular provinces in order to make sure that there is Jewish, Catholic, Orthodox, and Islamic presence in provinces where it makes historical sense. The medieval world was a diverse one, especially in the Middle East, and this diversity absolutely must be reflected in order to make the campaign feel more alive and interesting and immersive. In the Near East, you must have the dynamic between the Byzantine Eastern Orthodox Church and the Georgian Eastern Orthodox Church versus, for example, the Miaphysite Oriental Orthodox churches, the Armenian Apostolic, Syriac, Coptic churches. A lot of the time when these realms were under threat, kings and church leaders tried to cooperate to unite churches to create more unity against their invading foes. So the Byzantine or Armenian churches would try to unify, or the Orthodox and Catholic churches tried to reconcile differences in order to facilitate better cooperation. These aspects must be included as mechanics and choices for the player, so perhaps you can get an extra army or a one-time cash infusion for uniting the churches, but then you have to face some significant public order problems and rebellion in order to keep this union intact. Just give me something in this regard. Even Crusader Kings 3 doesn't really have a mechanic like this, as far as I'm aware. This would go a long way towards fixing the very bland portrayal of the Near East in both Medieval 1 and Medieval 2. The Holy Roman Empire also needs a big overhaul in its mechanics in order to be accurately portrayed. It needs to be a very loose empire that is difficult to control, and if emperors want to have greater control, there needs to be more detailed mechanics for the HRE here, absolutely, with elections and electors, various mini-factions within the HRE like the Kingdom of Bohemia, etc. In this vein, I should also mention the Papal States. While I think Medieval 2 actually did a pretty decent job with them considering the engine limitations, the Papal States should also have their own ambitions as well. though I'm still not sure exactly how to best simulate this in a Total War campaign. Speaking of factions like baronies and counties, the map for Medieval 3 has to be big. It has to be huge in scale, and it has to have a large number of provinces in order to really reflect the medieval era. It should take some inspiration from Crusader kings in this regard, and have realms be comprised of various baronies and counties. I'm not saying that this needs to be reflected on the campaign map, which would get a bit messy. I think that this could be implemented in an internal politics system that is more advanced than the one included in Rome 2. Rome 2's system was actually okay for me, and I feel if they expanded upon it and made it interact with other systems in the game, such as maintaining public order in cities controlled by a particular baron or count, rather than shoehorning it in, like I think they might have done in Rome 2, a little bit, I think they could make a really cool system that really adds to the immersion. In any case, I think that's pretty much mostly everything I wanted to say in regards to Medieval 3. I absolutely think a lot of these issues I discussed need to be addressed by the Creative Assembly if Medieval 3 is really going to be a smashing success that will be enjoyed by players for years and years to come. Thanks for watching! If you enjoy content and videos about the historical Total Wars and their mods, consider subscribing to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.